This is the download from Sounds Profitable, your daily source for the essential news in the business of podcasting, brought to you by Spreaker from iHeart. And today brought to you on a no mono mic on the show floor of podcast movement evolutions. Here's what you need to know for today, Wednesday, March 27th. First up, the 2024 Ambies Awards happened last night. The 4th Annual Podcast Academy Awards ceremony capped off the first day of podcasting's descent on Los Angeles for Evolutions by Podcast Movement. Podcast of the Year went to Slow Burn, becoming Justice Thomas. Wiser Than Me with Julia Louise-Dreyfus took home the Best Interview Podcast. And Best Kids Podcast went to the Cat in the Hat Cast, which download readers will remember as Wondery's entry into the flurry of branded kids podcasts launched last summer. Malcolm Gladwell was presented the Governor's Award for his impact on the podcasting industry. Up next, the podcast listening habits of highly influential executives. Signal Hill Insights regularly conducts brand lift studies focusing on the B2B, business-to-business, side of podcasting. Based on 24,505 Demos Plus surveys conducted over the past 2 years, Signal Hill Insights finds high-level and mid-level executives at organizations with more than 500 employees account for 4% of all adult monthly podcast listeners. And they're voracious listeners, with 83% of surveyed executives saying they listened to a podcast in the last week, compared to the 66% average for all respondents. 29% of executives listen to at least 5 hours of podcasts a week. Next up, why marketers need to embrace the funny when it comes to podcasting. In collaboration with The Drum for their Entertainment Focus Week, IAB UK spoke to several members of the IAB audio group on the popularity of comedy and podcasting and the benefits of incorporating humor into advertising. While there's no surefire formula to being funny, brands that lean into comedic ads find the effort has a good success rate. A funny ad is a sticky ad, and audio podcasting is a great way to let solid comedy writing shine without the extra burden of filming or animating video. Up next, how to turn a comedy podcast into a comedy documentary. Vulture writer Jesse David Fox has adapted Good Ones, an interview podcast featuring comedians breaking down parts of their routine, think Song Exploder but for jokes, into a Peacock docu-special. Good One, a show about jokes, expands on the premise of the original podcast to follow stand-up comedian Mike Birbiglia as he writes new material. Fox's upgrade further demonstrates the ability of podcasting to be grown into something bigger than the original show concept. And finally, Indigenous Screen Office, Canada, partners with Acast for inaugural podcast program. The Indigenous Screen Office selects 12 Canadian podcasts annually to support Indigenous storytellers. Their new partnership with Acast adds more to ISO support, including Acast-led information sessions and access to Acast services, including hosting for the lifetime of the podcast. As for the rest of the news, the Locked On Podcast Network has announced a new advertising relationship with AdsWiz. PBS NewsHour covers issues the podcast industry faces after the explosive growth of 2020. Nominees have been announced for the Radio Academy's 2024 Audio and Radio Industry Awards. And The Drum interviews comedian Adam Buxton about his approach to creating podcast ads. Spoiler alert, comedy is important. Be sure to check out the links to every article mentioned right in your podcast listening app or at soundsprofitable.com, where you can also subscribe to the newsletter version. The download is written and produced by Brian Barletta, myself, and Tom Webster. This episode is hosted on Spreaker and once again brought to you on a no mono mic. For Sounds Profitable, I'm Gavin Gaddis. Download us again tomorrow.